Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the briefing room. My name is Eric Cavanaugh. I will be your moderator for today's event, and boy, is this going to be exciting, folks, stuff. We're talking about preparing for the future of information management. Now, doesn't that sound awesome? Indeed it is. So let's move into some slides here. There is yours truly, and enough about me. I'm actually on the road today at the TDWI conference in Boston, so not in the studio. Always makes me a little bit nervous, but knock on wood. The mission of the briefing room, as many of you now know, is to reveal the essential characteristics of enterprise software. So what we do is a bit unorthodox, and it really is the secret sauce of our program. We pair analysts with vendors doing interesting things in the marketplace, and the analyst and vendor do not coordinate before the show. The main reason for that is we want to preserve the kind of natural discussion that occurs when an analyst in a particular space takes a briefing from a vendor to learn what they're doing these days. So it's an interesting approach, and it, knock on wood, has yielded very, very positive results over the last 2 years. In fact, we've done 70 of these things now, and we get great reviews from them because people know they're going to get the real deal. They're going to get genuine conversation. It's not going to be marketing fluff, and we work really hard to make sure that is what you get. So, moving right along, we cover a different topic each month, and the idea is that we want to give you, the end user, some apples-to-apples comparisons as best we can, such that you can make informed decisions about, let's face it, what are big deals to do, which is buying enterprise software. So obviously, if you're going to buy some new tool or some enterprise package, it's a serious operation. It's a very big deal, and you want to make sure you get exactly precisely what you thought you were getting and something that is going to serve your needs. So I will tell you that the audience always plays a significant role in these webcasts. You can ask any question, and we always ask the vendor to be able to answer any question during the live event. So please feel free to send those in at any point in time. Send them through the chat window or ideally through the Q&A window, and we'll be sure to get to them. So the topic of the month is integration, and what we're really talking about today is how you can prepare your information architecture such that you can take advantage of all these new things coming down the pike. Of course, everything revolves around big data these days, or it seems to. Of course, that stuff has been around for years. It's not new, but there is a whole lot more of it happening for obvious reasons. Web logs, web traffic, RFID, radio frequency identification tags, all kinds of monitors, all kinds of devices out there that are creating data. And they really always have created data, many of these devices, but we really didn't have the means to grab that data, load it into some kind of a system, and be able to use it effectively. And frankly, yours truly has spent a lot of time over the last year or so really studying a lot of the new big data type tools, and we're still in the very early stages of all this stuff. So we're talking really about how do you prep that battlefield? How do you prepare your information architecture to take advantage of things like the cloud? Of course, cloud computing is huge, and even though big data is very hot these days, let's face it, cloud is a major, major force because it changes the game in so many ways. How you integrate data, when you integrate data, what you do and how you do it with that data. Of course, in the cloud, a lot of stuff connects through APIs, application program interfaces, which is a much different deal than the traditional sort of ETL bulk loading type stuff that you've seen in modern enterprises using large amounts of data. And quite frankly, I think you're going to see some pretty big changes in the world of managing information around that whole ETL paradigm, which I personally think is going to be fading a bit in favor of data flows and data streams and being able to do more stuff in real time. So a lot of stuff is changing out there. We're very pleased to have our chief analyst and namesake, the eponymous Robin Bloor, is going to be with us today. And we're going to hear from Jaspersoft. So Jaspersoft is really one of the first big open source BI vendors, and they've been carrying that open source torch along with a number of other companies, and you've probably seen a lot more about open source in the last few years. Now, my personal theory is that the financial crisis of 2008 actually had a lot to do with that because, let's face it, traditional enterprise software is not just expensive, but the maintenance costs are expensive. And when the numbers drop, when you lose a lot of money in the financial world, well, that kind of trickles down to everybody out there, and everybody felt the pain. I mean, in late 2008, I think everybody in the country felt the pain one way or another, and I think that really helped spur a lot of development in the open source community. So there is obviously all kinds of detail in the open source world. Open source business models are, they're not doing that stuff for free, so they're trying to make some money some way, somehow, usually through either licenses or enterprise versions or contracts, service contracts. But you're seeing so much. It's not just Linux anymore. It's Linux and Hadoop with MapReduce and all that kind of fun stuff that deals with big data. So we're going to learn a lot about that stuff today. So we're very pleased to have Mike Boyarski, Director of Product Marketing at Jaspersoft. He has spent the majority of his 15 years in product management and marketing roles, and I can tell you that he really understands the technology. So we're happy to have someone who has been around. He spent several years at Oracle, as did about a third of all the people I meet in this business. It's a pretty funny legacy. So he's got the details on what they're doing, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and push his first slide. I'm going to hand the keys over to you, Mike. And then once you see that you are the controller of the WebEx, just click anywhere on that slide and use the down arrow on your keyboard to move forward. And the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Eric. I want to thank you guys for allowing us to participate in this great venue. So what we're going to be talking about today is really almost a mindset, if you will, a philosophy, and a little bit of insight into the types of customers that we're appealing to today. And it gives you a little bit of, hopefully, insight into where we're seeing data management and the future of sort of web-scale architectures going within the BI landscape, which of course includes data integration. So we have to first talk about this notion of web scale, and this is something that we're seeing more and more every single quarter that we close business. We're seeing organizations really embracing this new paradigm, which we're calling today web scale. It does have different meanings to different tools, so I'm not going to pretend to set a definition and state that this is the industry term. But what we do know is that most of the technologies that are coming online, these newer breed of tools, have a principle that categorizes around these attributes. These tools are scalable, they're reliable, they're secure. Generally, they're inexpensive. In most cases, they may ultimately be freely available as an open source product. And the last and most important is that they're simple. Their elegance in their design, their way to interact, configure, and use these tools are all very, very simple in their nature. So I've submitted a few logos here. Some of these are projects, some of these are companies. Really what these, and it's just a subset, it's really a mountain of technologies that have come online over the last few years that embraces this sort of web scale mentality. So why prepare for web scale computing? And it really comes down to some of the advantages that really are tied to cloud computing. And this is about agility. Organizations are being asked to respond to the influx of load, whether that's based on external demands. Maybe your commerce environment as a peak an interest in the commercial community, or maybe it's an internal demand that your groups internally are requesting information, data, reports, et cetera, and the ability to respond to those more quickly is what's driving a lot of the interest in this sort of web scale computing. It also aligns your skill sets to where you can be most effective. So really at the end of the day, you should be asking yourself, is your IT team, can they compete with a utility? Would your group, if we were to take an analogy, want to get into the power and energy business knowing that there is a commodity out there that's a team of experts that know how to keep servers up and running, keep the lights on, and do it in a very cost-effective manner. And then finally, it's about aligning costs. This is now, we're entering an era where you're finally able to pay for software based on usage, and that's really what the big win is for a lot of web scale platforms. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. And then there's just the reality of the evolution of this web scale environment. Most organizations have been embracing cloud-based computing around development environments. Maybe it's their backup solution. Maybe it's hosting their website or using a SaaS-based application. I think now we're reaching a point where we're starting to evolve into more horizontal services, services that are spanning many applications. They may be data integration in nature. They may be business intelligence in nature. Maybe it's a content management solution. Many of those are coming online through Box.net and other solutions. So now it's about preparing. It's about preparing, designing now to embrace later, because the reality is that everybody is going to be embracing these capabilities when the timing is right for their organization. So when we talk about web scale computing and we talk about it in the context of BI software, it's a journey, and certainly it's a point in time where we're all sort of evolving towards, and for some of us, we may be ready to go tomorrow. For most, we are planning and plodding along and trying to set ourselves up for success so that when that inevitability of a cloud-based deployment opportunity arises, you have the infrastructure and the componentry that allows you to take on that deployment model most effectively. So when we talk about web scale for BI solutions, so now we're going to speak more specifically around data integration and the reporting and analytics of that stack, we really have to first talk about the principles of open standards and service-driven architectures. The availability of open standards has been really critical to the adoption of most of these technologies. It allows for a broad set of users to build componentry that essentially is commonly understood, so that there's no, when you think about protocols and the advent of the internet, that really was successful because everyone agreed to follow a standard. And so the web footprint is becoming, it is a standard that most developers are embracing. So when you think about XML and Java, these are fundamental building blocks of an architecture today. And ultimately, also the front end of the data is a very critical part as well. So it's not just the back end and the Java architecture, the building blocks of your operating system. It's also the front end of your application that needs to be built in standards-based componentry. I like to think of web services as almost like home project tools that you might find at Home Depot or Lowe's. If you're kind of a do-it-yourselfer like myself, I like to buy tools that everybody else is using. I don't want to be the person that goes to a specialty shop and buys something that only a few in the world know how to use. And therefore, if I get myself into trouble, I'm really beholden to the provider of that tool, the expert of that tool. And it's no different than with web services. Web services are very common. They're based on REST or SOAP or HTTP. These are utilities that you can search on Google and have a community of users help you and move that technology forward. And that's really what the foundation layer and the open standards layer is very important around this architecture. The next layer of the architecture is really around elasticity. And elasticity today is really mostly managed at the for Java applications beneath the sort of data management layer. So it's sort of obscured or sort of removed from the underlying or the overarching data management layer. So you could use session management tools, and you can use templates from cloud hosting providers such as RightScale, or you can build your own using tools like Puppet or Chef. And this allows you to really take advantage of the elasticity that most of the cloud platforms have built in. And ultimately, that's sort of a required feature set that's part of a web scale platform. But more importantly, there's the multi-tenancy of this architecture. And multi-tenancy requires a bit more sophistication, as the application must be securely decoupled. The account information, the data, has to be decoupled from another tenant seeing that information. So this structure can be a bit more granular. It could include separation of threads or sessions, or it can be a little bit more simple, and it can be organized by file system or database virtualization. But it doesn't really matter how the implementation of multi-tenancy is enabled. It's a required component of this sort of future web scale platform. Also, compatibility of the infrastructure is very important. The ability to allow you to plug your technology into a variety of platforms. And this is really, we're talking about operating systems, web application tiers, and browsers. These are all sort of componentry that are shifting in terms of their underlying capabilities. But if you're building towards these standard building blocks, you are going to be much more ready to embrace what we would consider more grid-based or cloud-based computing. And these are the standards that are out there in the market. And then the last piece is the universal data access. And we at Jaspersoft are quite proud in the fact that we have a very data agnostic architecture. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a little bit more depth about the difference between ETL and direct access to data. But ultimately, the data that's coming online today, it's in all sorts of shapes and sizes. It's structured, it's unstructured. It comes with new tools to capture this information. So there's really just an inordinate amount of opportunity that's hidden within this data. And the real opportunity for these applications, this new future sort of web scale platform, is the ability to access and get a hold of that information in the most expeditious way possible. And so whether you're using XML to apply semantics to that data, whether you're going to centralize that data into a single repository to make sense and get a better visibility to that view, ultimately this is all about being able to access and connect to a variety of set of data. And that's really what web scale based platforms and products are able to provide. The other piece of the architecture, though, is the user interaction layer. So we talked a little bit about the back end, the Java layer, the back end infrastructure. Now we got to move into the user interaction layer, which is very critical to being classified as web scale ready. The applications that we see that are coming online today, the modern applications, are really following sort of judiciously the web-based proper standards, which is separation of the presentation layer from the underlying logic of the application. This is really important for a lot of reasons. One of which is the reality of application mashups. When we are seeing the growth of BI is moving beyond just your traditional standalone application where you have an IT group that's managing, a central warehouse, and then they're building reports and dashboards and analytics on top of this central repository. And this is all great and good. What we're seeing is an evolution of BI going into the applications themselves. Many applications today have rich sets of data within their operational data stores that can present that data instantly to an end user within the context of an application. And to do that, you have to have a module, a componentry of that UI that allows you to seamlessly embed and integrate those reports, those dashboards, those analytics directly within the workflow and the business process of that application. So this UI and this architecture of this UI is very critical to create these mashups of information to most effectively display information in context to a knowledge worker. And what they're, when they're working on an application, working on a business process, it's most important to present that information in the fastest, most reliable way. Usability, of course, has not been a strength of enterprise software. I've been in this business for long enough to know that there's some shameful practices that have occurred within the UI landscape. Thankfully, this is changing, and this has been changed primarily because we see and we recognize the value of consumer web interfaces. The consumer web has done a great job at designing UIs for the mass consumption, and this is something that web scale applications are really embrace, simplicity of use. And so when you're talking about within the enterprise, the majority and the loss of most BI usage has a lot to do with the overwhelming power of some of these tools. They present a lot of capabilities that require somebody to be trained and go to a specialized course to learn how to use. And that's just not the luxury that most consumer web applications have. If you don't like that application, whether it's an email or a social application, you move on because it's free. There's very little lock-in. With enterprise applications, they haven't had that luxury. You usually, you're paying an upfront license fee. You're really locked into this application. You're buying into the paradigm. So you're forced to learn how to use this tool. And that's changing. And web scale applications are really focused on elegance and simplicity, really focusing on the right user interaction to the right user. And so this is something that really is a focus area for these types of applications. And the final element is ubiquitous access. Ultimately, we know that most organizations are accessing information from anywhere at any time, thanks to the evolution of smartphones and technology and bandwidth costs, et cetera. There's a variety of drivers. The reality is that these applications need to be accessible from anywhere. And there's ways to build these applications so that you can do that elegantly without necessarily relying on fat clients or what I would consider native applications. So the last piece of this web scale componentry or this web scale definition is the business model. And this is actually one of the most important parts and one of the reasons why we've seen such a tremendous adoption of some of these great data management tools like MongoDB, like Hadoop, some of these great tools that can manage lots of information in a very powerful way. The web scale architecture has to embrace a pay-as-you-go model. It really has to align use to the usage model to the cost model. In many consumer web applications, they embrace a freemium or even free model. We're seeing in the enterprise market, the subscription software model is becoming more widely accepted through SaaS applications and commercial open source, which utilizes primarily a subscription, an annual subscription model. Now this really aligns, again, your use of the software to the value that you're getting within the organization. And that's becoming really just a sort of a requirement for these web scale applications. And the business model also has to accommodate the reality that most organizations are evolving to the cloud. So they may be running some of their technology in the cloud, some of it on premises, and the business model needs to align to accommodate those two different distinct kind of usage models or paradigms. You can't have one or the other because that's just not reality. Many folks are in a gradual transition through modules, through applications to this web scale world. So when we talk about Jaspersoft, we really can embrace many of these attributes through our architecture, through our user interface, and through our business model. Our architecture is completely web standard. It is based on REST, which is the modern interface layer for web services today. SOAP, certainly very standard and been around for a while, and it's a rock-solid interface. But we find REST just to be a more elegant, less chatty, if you will, interface to work with. And developers like it better because it's easier to work with. We also have a distributed architecture, so we make sure that we're separating the various layers of the BI stack, whether it's the user interface layer, whether it's the back-end database, whether it's the data management processing through ETL. All of those should be distributed in their nature so that you can scale out the various layers of your system as needed. We also rely on standard infrastructure. We run on Intel-based, Unix-based systems so that you as an organization can embrace whatever platform and investment that you've made. Most cloud-based providers are leveraging Intel-based platforms, so Linux tends to be the predominant platform in use. And that's really one of the primary reasons that a lot of our customers say they go with Jaspersoft is because they're able to take advantage of the building blocks that they're moving towards, which is more commoditized. And also our ability to connect to data, and we'll spend a little bit more time about this in our architecture slide, but we're able to connect to a variety of sources, whether they're relational, non-relational, or NoSQL or OLAP. We really are data agnostic. The beauty of our connectivity is that you can directly connect if you're running a report or a dashboard or some sort of analytic view. You can directly connect to that data source using our connectivity. However, if you want to move that data for a particular reason, you want to cleanse that data, you want to centralize it, you want to maybe version it, moving that to a central warehouse makes a lot of sense. So we also have ETL to do that movement as well. So we have a two-phased approach depending on what your needs are. Direct access for instantaneous results of your queries. Very, very good for big data environments because you don't want to be moving a lot of data around when you're talking about big data. Or if you want to centralize that data, you have the facilities of an ETL tool to do that as well. So very, very powerful, flexible technique that Jaspersoft provides. Our user experience is we're very serious about it from a variety of elements. One is its architecture, the way we layer our UI and separate out the HTML, business logic, and CSS structure so that the customization, integration of our data views into other applications can be done seamlessly. That's a very important part of our story. And ultimately what we want to present is an elegant, easy-to-use interface. So we don't want to unnecessarily put power in front of people that don't or want power. So this is the user interface that we're really sort of embracing now, which is using just enough interactivity so that the users can make sense of their information. We also can support a variety of mobile devices, of course, Android and iOS being the predominant industry leaders in market and availability, and so that's a device type that we support in native format as well as through a HTML5 browser-based format for tablets. And ultimately, our business model is, again, a much more modern business model where you're paying as you go, if you will. You can use our software in the cloud and pay based on a monthly basis, or you can pay on an annual basis based on your local deployment. And we're also much more focused on deployments that are CPU-based. So this means we want people to use our software in a very pervasive, wide net approach, and we don't want to nickel and dime or charge based on user, because ultimately user-based pricing is great for workgroup style deployments, not great for wide deployments of enterprise oriented software. So this is just a quick snapshot of the Jaspersoft architecture. Again, if we look at it from the bottom up, our connectivity layer is really driven based on a JDBC interface. We can connect to really just about anything, whether it's a flat file, whether it's a relational source, whether it's a NoSQL source. It doesn't really matter to us. Once we pull that or connect to that information, we can do a variety of things with that data. We can present that data in a very well-structured report. We can include that data in an in-memory engine so that you can do all sorts of interactive elements to that data, whether you want to slice and dice, pivot, chart, etc. We use these modules within our architecture. So if I'm looking at the bottom layer there, where we have our Jasper Reports library, which is essentially the engine that's rendering these reports and assembling them into the particular view that you want to view your report in. It's the workhorse, if you will, of our technology. Our Jasper Reports server tool comprises of a lot of user interaction layers. So if you want to build a report against a metadata layer, we have a web-based UI that controls that for you. We have a repository that collects metadata information about your business information. That metadata can do a bunch of things. It can aggregate data for you. It can provide business-friendly names to maybe complex data types that are not really well thought through by a developer who's building that application. It does a number of good things. Metadata does a number of good things for business users. It simplifies, it aggregates, it caches. It's all about preparing your data so that you can interact with it to a large number of different types of users. And ultimately, we also have our scheduler. We have an OLAP engine that does a lot of more powerful aggregations. So if you have a very complex, rich data set and you want to cache those, we have a rollup-based engine that does that aggregations for you. And then our API layer is completely REST-based as well as SOAP-based. So if you wanted to just access a particular service within our stack, and this is very common within the web scale compute paradigm, this entire platform is directly accessible using web services. So you can get exactly what you want and present it in the way that you expect without necessarily being overwhelmed or encumbered by a big, giant user interface. So that's one of the big advantages of our platform. Think of it as a headless BI platform. Like you're able to directly access services, data services, for the best integration with your application or your organization. And then the final layer is our UI framework. And this is where, again, we did a lot of work to separate out the presentation layer of our user interface from the logic of the application. And so the better you can separate, the lower the cost it's going to be to customize, integrate, and mash up those data views within your application. So just really quickly, I'll skim through these briefly, but just for those who are new to Jaspersoft, we are a commercial open source business intelligence provider. We do provide a full suite of tools from reporting, dashboards, analytics, as well as data integration. And we also are really strong in our ability to integrate BI inside other applications. So embedded BI is a very strong use case for us. We're also very flexible in terms of because of our web-based platform. So we can plug into a variety of environments and connect to a variety of different types of data. We've got a number of customers that span the industry, so we don't really necessarily land on any particular vertical. We have a number of software and technology companies, but we also have just as many in the financial services, healthcare, as well as telecommunications. We've got a very vibrant community of developers. So when we're talking today about web scale computing, we're talking about these literally 275,000 community members that are downloading our software, using it, interacting with us, asking us how to use our software in a particular way. And so part of today's session is really sort of echoing and sort of sharing our experience and what we're seeing in the marketplace around business intelligence and sort of a new way or a more modern way to embrace it versus the traditional standalone sort of deployment model that has been so readily apparent over the last 20 to 30 years. And then, of course, as a growth company, we continue to grow. We're seeing a lot of companies deploying us in small departments and in very large, tens of thousands of seat deployments. So we're really running the gamut in terms of the types of deployments that we're falling into. So Jaspersoft is really focused on scale, and we want to scale for all user questions, whether those are power user questions, whether those are I'm just a casual business user that wants to view a report every once in a while, to the most advanced data analyst. And so we're really focused on addressing tools, providing capabilities for every user profile that's out there. We also want to really focus on the different types of contexts and devices that are in play as well. When we talk about context at Jaspersoft, we're meaning we want to display the right information to the right user at the right time. And we find that the best way to do this is through more of a mashup capability of that data view within your application. Ultimately, we find that within our own organization, the folks that are responding and using data to drive their decisions is typically done in the context of a particular business workflow. And if you think about how you work day in and day out, if you're logging into a CRM system and looking at your customer satisfaction, looking at your pipeline, maybe looking at your support tickets, and you're able to apply data in context as you're viewing that application, whether it's a trend report, whether it's a spike in utilization, whether it's some additional piece of data that's part of this customer's overall ecosystem, all of that data can help you make a better decision in real time. And so that's ultimately where context is very, very important for this new use of data. And we think the platform to enable context has to be very well thought out. It has to be easy to embed, integrate, and extend. And so that's really where we focused on self-service for the casual user, if you will, the folks that are not necessarily have gone to class to learn how to use a BI tool. These are folks that are tasked with regular jobs that are just trying to make better decisions day in and day out. And in terms of the market landscape for BI, we have found ourselves in sort of a unique position because we're thinking about scale of every user profile, but we're also thinking about these other dynamics, which is context as well as device access. And so this is where we find ourselves, separating from some of the specialty vendors and visualization vendors which have very good tools for a particular type of user, the data analyst user, as well as the platform vendors that have an architecture that was really built in the 80s and 90s. And it was built on an architecture that, frankly, is not moving forward. These are architectures that are sort of being sunsetted in favor of more web scale, more web standard platforms. So when we talk about, again, our user interface, we want to talk about the ability to apply different interfaces, different information sources to end users in a very elegant and easy to navigate way. So again, we focus on any user with any device in any context. So one of the other elements that we want to talk about from Jaspersoft is just the embracing of the cloud. So when we talk about the cloud, we talk about it in two ways. One is I'm building an application on the cloud, and I want to find the component tree that allows me to make the most success out of that cloud investment, or I want to run my BI platform in the cloud on demand without setting anything up. And so we enable both of those using partners. We also have our big data partnership that allows us to connect to a variety of big data engines, whether those are NoSQL based like Mongo or Hadoop, whether those are relational, if it's Vertica or Greenplum. We can connect to just about anything that makes your investment in Jaspersoft most flexible. And finally, we're also scaled for mobile devices by running on Android as well as iOS devices. That gives us a great opportunity to embrace and meet the needs of most of the device use that's out there in the marketplace. So that sort of wraps up the Jaspersoft story. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Eric and have a quick chat with Robin.
Okay, and Robin, I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter right now, and you can go ahead and take the floor away.
Okay, I've got the floor. Well, I guess there's an awful lot of dimensions to this that we could go into, but the first thing that I wanted to do was to talk about open source in the cloud, simply because Jaspersoft is a very good example of an open source company, and because I personally believe that open source in the cloud are having a dramatic impact on the industry. So first of all, the open source trend, we could say many things about this. We could say, I don't know, that it began in almost at the beginning of the 90s when Linux started to be more than just a hobby. And Linus Torvald proclaimed that he wanted to conquer the world, and he seems to have actually done that in operating system terms just about as well as you could do it. However, the kind of open source trend that we're witnessing now is that open source seems to be viable in pretty much every dimension of product. Probably not every dimension, but pretty much. And there's a lot of reasons why it's successful. The obvious one is that price of software never had any strong relationship with the cost of production and distribution. In other words, if you became successful, you could pretty much lock down the customer base and charge much, much more than it ever cost you to produce or distribute the software. And the consequence of that was that a particular business model arose, and we all know the vendors that pursue that business model. And the second consequence was that it had to be challenged in some way, and open source was the challenge. There was another factor, customers, and I was in situations, I don't know, 30 years ago, where it was very irritating that you couldn't get at the source code of some of the software that you used. And that's always been aggravating. With open source, absolutely you can. So in the proprietary world, product direction is determined probably by the largest customers and by lock-in features. Also, I would guess, by the goals of the chief developer. But with open source, the kind of direction the product takes is collaborative, established. And because of that, there is only so much that the people that are controlling the destiny of an open source product can actually impose upon the customer base. The customer base has got more say, in my opinion. This is just my opinion, by the way. We then have the cloud trend. I agree with Mike that he called it web scale, and I believe that the cloud is basically, first of all, it's growing at an extraordinary rate. It's almost difficult. It's very difficult to predict how much it's growing. It's somewhere between 100 and 200%. It's certainly more than 100%, but it does depend on how you count it. But that's corporate IT that's growing at that rate. Out there in user land, it's probably going at a much swifter rate than that. But the important point is it's torn down the walls of the data center. there really is no longer a space limit to the amount of computing power that you can have. There is obviously a cost limit, but the cloud tends to be inexpensive. It isn't inexpensive for everything, but it's certainly inexpensive for anything that's commodity. Some functionality is almost self-migrating. Various companies simply go to the cloud without consulting IT and without consulting anyone, because if they want an SAS service, they get one. And it's that simple. And things are getting very virtual in the sense that we've now got architectures, and Mike explored this in some depth, and I think we'll probably have a longer conversation about it. In terms of distributed architectures, things are getting very, very fluid, and people, software is now being built with a far more distributed architecture than it ever had before. There was an idea that was born in 1971 called the anti-Spark 3-schema architecture, which everybody pretty much ignored except a few people for about 40 years. And it was really about the separation of concerns. And now the separation of concerns is pretty much a principle, and it's going to have to be if we're going to have web scale that scales out to the whole of the web. And then we've got the invasion of the data center via the private cloud, and that is, well, there's a lot of stuff that can't move to the public cloud, but if we build a private cloud within the data center, then first of all we'll be running in a cloud manner, and we will also be in position to migrate to the cloud. All of those, as far as I can see, are very positive cloud trends. There are a few things that are worth saying about the cloud and open source together. Open source now dominates the software stack of public cloud vendors. Basically, the likes of Amazon can, for the sake of cost, flexibility, and because they're big enough and ugly enough to do their own support, adopt open source wherever it fits. And therefore, the whole of the, let's say, the proprietary lock upon big computing is now gone. For BI users, the cloud and open source is pretty much good enough unless you have some very special performance requirement or some very special, big data requirement. The speed to deploy the cloud is so much faster than an awful lot of corporate computing that it's almost like even if it didn't perform as well, then the speed to deploy might actually win customers, But there is the issue that some people have complex requirements, and right now it's what I would call the more commodity type of software that's migrating to the cloud. An interesting point, the cloud is damaging software brands. I've talked to a lot of vendors about this, but basically if you've established over 20 years a big software brand, and somebody offers you, somebody's running a database in the cloud, you don't ask, is that an Oracle database, or is it DB2, or is it, you don't even ask it's MySQL, because you're just buying the software as a service, so you do not care, right? And all of that reduces the price of the business service, and that's a positive outcome. And I'd also like to just make the statement that the cloud and open source are both emerging trends. They're not complete by any manner of means. Okay, I'm going to dash through this because we can talk more about it, but basically the way I look at BI, you can think of it as hindsight, oversight, insight, and foresight. And if you're actually looking to create a BI capability, a global capability across an organization or even across a department, then I would say think about those 4 words. Find out what you've got, think about what you need. But there are nuances, and actually if you look at this list of nuances, you discover that a lot of them are data integration. There's data flow integration and automation, which the BI has got to work. It's got to be able to get the data in a timely manner. It's got to perform, and that can often be a function of how well it connects to things. In terms of data coverage, yes, of course, we want the widest possible data coverage, but that's also about integration. The effective representation of data is really about, the design decisions that have been made within the BI product as to how they show the stuff. But user self-service is a kind of combination in a way of what the software can do, but also how able the user is to be able to connect stuff. And then we have, is this stuff actionable manually? In other words, how does it fit into the business process, and is there automated action? And Mike talked about that, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more time to talk about that, because the embedding of BI is clearly upon us. The final nuance is completeness. What I did was that I drew up a kind of, well, a simple table, really. The idea being that you could take those nuances down one side and look at hindsight, oversight, insight, and foresight. And a company could, in one way or another, score itself or just actually make notes in the boxes. And that would give them a fairly universal view, or a fairly, the word Catholic came into my head, fairly complete view of the whole area of BI. And I think that's pretty much it for what I wanted to say. I put up this slide of the information-oriented architecture, which we did a year and a half ago, just to remind everybody that there's an awful lot of nuance between the BI applications and the data management layer. You know, it's all there in the middleware stuff, but there's also software development. There's also monitoring, support, and so on and so forth. So this is not, you know, the idea of BI in the cloud, very positive in my opinion. But the question is, what is it that can go to the cloud and what is it that can't? So I have a whole series of questions. We actually could start anywhere. But I would just start, I'd just like to have some idea of the distinction with Jaspersoft between the cloud implementation and the on-site implementation, Mike. So, you know, I'm starting with, is the cloud service multi-tenant? If it's multi-tenant, how does that work?
Yeah, so we do have built-in multi-tenancy. Our approach is to essentially leverage a file system approach. So what that means is, if you were tenant A and you signed up for a service to Jaspersoft, you would configure your users, your data, your reports, and you would store all of these through all of the folder structure that is part of tenant A. And then when tenant B were to sign back in or log in and create an account, they would get their own folder structure. And this is all managed within a relational database. So it's built into our platform. It's been available for about 3 years, and it's probably the most important feature for many of our SaaS customers that want to provide BI for their SaaS application, and they already leverage multi-tenancy, and so that's the approach that we have been using for some time.
Yeah, right, and that's you know, well explained, and I can at least envisage that in my head as to how that works. But the question is, you know, what if I'm awkward? I'm a customer, and yes, I want to use most of what you do, but I want to clip in a little bit of code of my own that may actually want to access those files. Does that mean I have to go in-house now, or have you got any way of accommodating that in the cloud service?
Yeah, so I think maybe what you're sort of alluding to is if for a hosted environment. So just to take a quick step back, Jaspersoft currently does not offer host its own software for, you know, a SaaS-based use of BI. So if you wanted to use Jaspersoft hosted in the cloud, we do have partners that would do that. They manage the environment. They're you know, managing the upgrades and the adding of users and configurations of your data. So our software can be run in the cloud. It can be hosted as a cloud service, but we ourselves are not managing that environment day in and day out as a sort of quote-unquote a SaaS BI company. However, to answer your question, if somebody wanted with one of our partners customize the implementation of Jaspersoft and they were hosted in this sort of multi-tenant way, it depends on the nature of the customization. In general, I would say, yes, your user interface is totally customizable if you wanted to change the look and feel of that UI and you didn't want that to impact the other tenant that's also leveraging the same footprint of the application or Java home, if you will. That can be accommodated. If you get into underlying logic within the application, there's a line that has to be drawn where those changes cannot be maintained as independent customizations. So it kind of depends on the nature of the customization, but we do see very often a lot of branding, UI changes that can be all completely managed as independent changes that don't affect other tenants. That are sort of encapsulated.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've done the separation. I mean, obviously I haven't messed with your software, so I can't actually say this, but I think, you know, with complete conviction, but I think you've done the separation of concerns fairly well. I mean, I think you know, the fact that you are able to offer a configurable UI means that at least a separation between the UI and the business logic is pretty much locked away. Which is a good thing. I mean, the next question is about this. Really, the integration often means ETL. In my experience, it pretty much always means ETL. So, you know, what's the relationship? You know, I know you can connect to a lot of things. So you've got relational connections coming out of your ears. You've got various NoSQL connections, and you've got Hadoop connection capability. But where does ETL sit in that? Because often when you're grabbing data from somewhere, you do actually need to transform it. How does Jaspersoft cope with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually offer two approaches to data integration. The first is using a full suite of ETL tools. So that would have your normal connect, you know, you connect and extract that data. If you want to transform that, you want to merge date fields, country codes, etc. You want to do some cleansing. Any of those normal steps can be managed within that transform process. And then you load that data, and we can do loading in an ELT or ETL fashion, depending on what your particular needs are. So that is fully enabled through our product called Jaspersoft ETL. But we also provide a service that allows our BI server to directly access the data. So when you think about something like a MongoDB environment, for example, you may want to not move that data around. You may want to just directly run a query against that environment, get access to that report, and quickly display that to your users. You can connect our BI server directly to that source system to give you the fastest response, so you're not moving the data around. So it depends on what your needs and requirements are will dictate which approach you go with. And we actually have customers that use both, that they will use a direct access for certain types of queries and certain types of reports because they need to be quickly available. And then they have other types of reports that are built on a workflow, where it's an ETL process, they transform and they load and merge the data with another set of data, and then they run a batch, you know, report that goes against that central warehouse. And so it depends on the nature of the report and what you're trying to do, but we do offer both flavors or both abilities to connect and access data.
Okay. I mean, the next question is really about embedding. I mean, you talked about this, and it's a very beguiling prospect, and it's always been my opinion that fairly soon we will be getting to the stage where BI and transactional applications became, from a business process point of view, it became very important that they were actually as close together as possible. So, you know, if you could just talk through how embeddable is the Jaspersoft capability. I just want to take, let's say, yeah, I don't know, let's say a drill down or something, and I want to put it somewhere where a user who is, let's say, dealing with customers can drill down into something that's related to the customers, kind of in situ as a part of their job. How would you do that? It's a kind of mashup capability I'm talking about.
Yeah, so it depends on the size and the complexity of the query, but in most cases we're able to provide a fair amount of analytics using in-memory techniques. So we'll take a query, a series of queries, cache the result set of that query in memory. We would just take a little, you know, we take advantage of a very popular tool called EHCache, and it stores that information in a very rapid to access way. And it also is great for applications that don't want to be encumbered with an ETL process, a data warehouse, you know, maybe an OLAP engine on top of that. When you start adding all of those tools up, analytics in an embedded application becomes a huge undertaking for most of these application vendors. So an in-memory technique using either data virtualization or just using standard queries that are returning the result set, storing that in memory, and so that you are able to deliver full interactivity. So if you want to drill, filter, sort, chart that information on the fly, and all of those interactions don't result in new queries hitting that operational data store, which of course is expensive. That's the preferred technique that we're seeing. It's all rooted around in-memory capabilities, because it's a simple architecture. It offloads those queries against the operational data store, and it's fast.
Yeah, right. I would go with that. And it's going to be reliable as well, in the sense that then you're not going to want to be refreshing that every 2 minutes. You're probably going to want to refresh it at a much more leisurely pace. I'm going to have to pass you back to Eric now, because I appear to have run out of time. Maybe because I was enjoying myself so much. But Eric, I'm sure the audience have questions here.
Yes, indeed. So I'm going to be dialing back in from the hotel phone here, but for the moment, let me give you one of the good questions. We had a bunch of questions in here. Here's one. What platform is this BI server built on? In other words, programming language, application framework. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's a Java-based application. So it's all based on standard Java. We use some componentry that is open source. So there is some components of our platform that are available out there in the community. All of the interfaces are REST-based. So if you're building a Java-based application, most folks are familiar with that style of interface. We also have the SOAP-based interfaces. But again, it's all based on JavaScript or Java-based environments. So that's the platform.
Okay, good. And we got a lot of other interesting questions here. One of the attendees wanted to know, just kind of understand the difference between what you guys are doing and, for example, the Microsoft BI stack. The question says something like, why do I only hear about Java and other tools that many of my users are discouraged migrating from because of price and features? Can you maybe just offer some high-level differentiation between what you guys have built and what someone might get if they went with the complete Microsoft stack?
Yeah, so we have a lot of customers. Of course, you can never not work with Excel. I mean, that's probably the most.
That's a tweet.
Or interact with data, but Microsoft has a complete BI stack, just like a number of other vendors do. We find that when you get to the amount of functionality that you want with something from Jaspersoft, you're talking about multiple components. SQL Server with the Exchange, with the SharePoint, and then you've got a number of other plugins. And when you put these all together, you've got a very rich platform that's giving you a lot of capabilities. But now you've got yourself a pretty hefty footprint and installation and all the configuration. So that is really where we find a lot of challenges with some folks that are moved from Microsoft to Jaspersoft. Jaspersoft has a very much more slimmed down, streamlined footprint. You can download it in one sort of image, if you will, and it provides you with everything from the ability to build reports to dashboards to analytics, all in a single sort of integrated framework. So that's probably where it would come down to. I would never get into a feature function debate, because we may or may not have everything covered as with Microsoft, but it does come down to running and managing the environment and what's right for your business and your skill set.
Absolutely. Okay, good. And we got another question. Attendee noted that you commented on OLAP and ROLAP, but what about MOLAP, multidimensional OLAP, and HOLAP?
There's a whole lot of OLAP. Yeah, there is a number of ways to take advantage of OLAP. Currently, we support a ROLAP technique. Pay attention to our upcoming release that's going to be coming out later this year, and we'll talk a little bit about MOLAP support. But at this point in time, we are ROLAP only. We do have our own engine. It's called Mondrian, and it is a ROLAP technique, but we will be supporting other engines, OLAP engines, shortly, so stay tuned for that.
Okay, we've got a couple more good questions here. And folks, if you tuned in late, yours truly is on the road today, so not in the studio, but trying to manage everything anyway. So here's a really good question. Attendee writes, what are the open source packages that Jaspersoft integrates? In other words, what are the pieces that you built yourselves? And I know you also integrate some other open source products into the package, right?
Yeah, so I guess it comes down to, for those real tech heads out there, so some of the componentry that we include are Spring. We have a Spring security framework. We use Hibernate for our object relational mapping, so we use that to interface with the relational environment. So we do ship with Postgres to manage the metadata. We use Apache for our web tier, but you can swap that out if you want to use something else. So those are sort of the high-level componentry. There's probably dozens of small little projects that are part of that. There's a great resource on our jasperforge.org website. If you click on that and go to our Jasper Report Server project page, just click on that and you'll find all of the components that complete our solution.
Okay, that's actually a good segue into the community. Can you talk about community resources? I know you just kind of referenced them there, but with the open source model, you really do rely heavily on the community of developers who will submit various things that they've built and kind of flesh out the stack, right? Can you talk about community resources in general?
Yeah, again, it's jasperforge.org. That's our community website, and it contains the open source software products. It has all of the forums with literally, I don't know how many, I think we have 92,000 forums with questions, and so it's all search-based, so you can just ask your questions and get answers there. Great samples, widgets, code, submissions have all been provided to this environment. We're super excited to announce a new version of this whole platform in the next week. So it's going to be all new looking, and it's going to be pretty exciting on how, if you're new to our community, to be able to just find information. We have about 275,000 folks registered with this community. They're very active. Every day I think we get about 3,000 people that download our software. So that's the place where people go that are part of our community, and it's the best resource for you getting started on those components.
Yeah, that's really good information. By the way, have you done any work as a way to sort of triage those comment centers? Because I know a lot of times if you go into one of those resource areas, it can be like wandering through the forest without a compass, even though search can be good. Have you done any work to sort of analyze a lot of that text and come up with either ratings for users who give really good answers or anything along those lines?
Yeah, we are applying the best of Web 3.0, if you will. Semantics are very important when we talk about a lot of unstructured data. So our new platform, it's not part of our current platform, but literally it's by this time next week, we have a tag infrastructure. So tagging, and there's certain types of individuals that sort of have a clout score, if you will. And so the combination of those aspects will really allow for all the noise to be pushed down and the really good content to be surfaced up. So yeah, voting, tagging, and also personal sort of expertise are all ways to really make sure that the best information is easiest to find. So again, stay tuned. I wish I had that right now because I would probably tell you that I would have put it in slides, but next week is the best time to take a look at that.
Oh, good. Well, it's coming down the pike. It was a good question then. Okay, another question from a member of the audience. The architecture that you talked about, is that new, the attendee asks, and does the novelty mostly reside in the ESB, the Enterprise Service Bus, and the UDI, which I'm guessing stands for what, Universal Display Interface?
Yeah, so the question is it new? The answer is no. In fact, the underpinnings of our platform has been around for about 10 years. We have always been built from the ground up to be embedded inside other applications. So, I would say ESB, UDI are all places that we've been integrated with and work well with. There's nothing that we've done that has changed. The only thing that we do is every feature that we build, we think service-enabled first. So it has to be service-enabled, so that somebody who wants to build this into their application can do so without necessarily taking the weight of the UI along with them. So that software it's all service-driven software, and how we think and build our capabilities here.
Okay, good. And folks, since I'm on the road, we're going to wrap up here after one last question. We'll send all these questions to Mike so he can answer them offline if yours was not answered. But, you know, Robin talked about the separation of concerns, which I think is really critical to the agility of what you guys are doing. And, you know, certainly as you talk about the cloud, boy, it's sure nice to have that separation of concerns when you start integrating with the cloud. And in terms of other functionality for that sort of top end, one of the attendees wants to know, what are you doing in the area of data visualization? In other words, how do you compare to what maybe like a Tableau has or some of the other vendors, and what are your plans in that direction?
Yeah, it's a great question. Data visualization is quickly becoming the way that we all as laymen can become analysts. And there is a number of things that we have in our tool set today in the form of chart types, widgets, maps to display visually all the information that you want in your reports, in your dashboards. I am going to be talking a lot about visualization in our next release. It really will sort of look and behave like some of the leading tools that we've been seeing and become so sort of comfortable with. Tableau is one of the ones you mentioned. The thing about visualization for us is, again, because we think architecture first, we want that to be web standards. We want it to be able to be accessible from any device. We want the interaction to be completely seamless and simple to work with. And so all of the attributes are things that we are building into our platform. Visualization, I would say, is probably the centerpiece of some of our plans for the next release that we have coming towards the end of the year. So another one of those, stay tuned to Jaspersoft, and I hope for those that need that capability, that they'll be pleasantly surprised and encouraged to see how we've come with that.
That's great. Okay, folks, you can see the upcoming topics right there. We got a couple more this month, and then, of course, next month. This does conclude our broadcast. Yes, we do archive all these events. You can go to insideanalysis.com, go onto the webcast section, go to the briefing room, and look under recent episodes. We usually get them up there very, very quickly. So, yes, send your friends and colleagues there whenever they get a chance. We certainly appreciate all the input that you guys give us, all the great questions today. Thank you very much for all that, and thank you for all the tweets, too. We had a lot of good tweets out in there. And, yes, so this does conclude our event. Panelists, stick around for just a quick minute for a debrief, but we'll catch up to you next week, folks. We're going to talk about some really, really interesting stuff. A company called Ideate is going to be in the briefing room. So that wraps it up for us today, folks. We'll catch up to you next week, same bat time, same bat station. Take care, folks. You have been listening to the briefing room. Bye-bye.